Here at Volunteer Florida. You just heard from our new CFO, Richard Schwartz. And also joining me today is Javita Woodrich, who is our Volunteer Services Director, Debbie Lupton, who is our financial analyst, and your friendly budget person for this next budget part, and Audrey Kidwell, our Volunteer Generation Fund Program Manager. So we're going to walk through some high level and details related to this application. We are really excited to expand the Volunteer Generation Fund this year and look forward to working with more of you than ever this year. So first of all, just quickly, Volunteer Florida is the governor's lead agency for volunteerism and national service in Florida. We were established in 1994 by the Florida legislature, and we're governed by a board of commissioners appointed by the governor and approved by the Florida Senate. In Florida, we support AmeriCorps state programming, emergency management, the coordination of volunteers and donations, the Volunteer Generation Fund, and a number of other governor priorities related to recognizing volunteers and national service members.
The Volunteer Florida administers the Volunteer Generation Fund, an initiative of the Corporation for National and Community Service that focuses investment on volunteer management practices that increase volunteer recruitment and retention. These increased of capacity for your organization to recruit, manage, support, and retain skills-based volunteers to serve at high-level volunteer assignments. In anticipation of receiving the federal funding for the FY17 Volunteer Generation Fund, Volunteer Florida will make available up to $286,000 to a maximum of 22 sub-grantees serving the needs of Floridians, each receiving $13,000 in grant funding and training support for their participation in the FY17 Volunteer Generation Fund initiative. Really quick, we just want to talk about skills-based volunteering. And so skills-based volunteering is a strategic type of volunteerism that exponentially expands the impact of nonprofits by incorporating a range of skills that strengthen the operation and services of nonprofit organizations. These skills-based volunteers utilize their skills, experience, talents, and education of the volunteers and match them with the needs of the nonprofit. In the infographic below, these numbers reflect the 2014-2015 year. We invested $150,000 in Florida nonprofits. There were 15 that were awarded VGF funding, and those nonprofits recruited 6,478 skills-based volunteers, serving over 90,000 hours, which is a value of $1.9 million.
Thank you, Audrey. So the priorities for the Volunteer Generation Fund, we're going to talk about that a little bit. So eligibility, these are federal funds from the Corporation for National and Community Service. So you'll see that same broad eligibility for organizations as you would with any CNCS funding. So nonprofits, foundations, education entities, government entities, etc., are eligible to apply. And we are also targeting a geographic diversity across the state of Florida. We use the Florida Division of Emergency Management regions in the state. You'll see that in the application. So just a note on that geographical diversity as well. The priority areas for the Volunteer Generation Fund are the 6 Corporation for National and Community Service focus areas, which include disaster services, economic opportunity, education, environmental stewardship, healthy futures, and veterans and military families. So your applications could be engaging skills-based volunteers to focus on a wide variety of community needs. Our Volunteer Generation Fund here at Volunteer Florida also targets STEM and My Brother's Keeper initiatives as special considerations. A large portion of the Volunteer Generation Fund portfolio each year opts in to one or both of these special considerations, which has allowed Florida to be able to tell the story of how skills-based volunteers move the needle in supporting those President Obama's My Brother Keeper initiative and also STEM support for students and others in Florida. So those are 2 of our special considerations. Performance measures. Performance measures are your target. You will see this in your application. Organizations must opt in to say that you will engage 300 community volunteers and that those 300 volunteers will serve a total of 2,000 hours. So that is the targets in your applications. That is what you are opting in to say. That is a requirement for the Volunteer Generation Fund. What we've heard from our previous grantees was the targets were easier to meet than they thought because this can include episodic volunteers and ongoing volunteers. So again, those are the targets for this year's Volunteer Generation Fund. There will also be a pre- and post-test assessment that measures your organization's improvement on volunteer management practices. So that will occur in the beginning of your grant and again at the end of your grant. If we want to take a moment to check the chat and see if there's any questions, and then we'll continue with some of the other elements. Thank you for the questions so far in the chat. Just a reminder, this will be posted on our website, so you and your colleagues will be able to access it for future reference. Okay, any other questions so far? And if you do have a question, just a quick reminder, please type it into the chat. We have some limitations of our webinar technology today, so go ahead and type your questions into the chat. I see a question related to the organization being statewide. Yes, the organization can be statewide. However, you would need to select one primary area related to Florida's geography for those volunteers to serve in. I see another question about less volunteers completing the hours. No, 300 is the minimum target. So that's 300 volunteers recruited and 2,000 hours served. See another question about the pre and the post test. That is something that Volunteer Florida administers. So an organizational representative would take that as the grant starts and then again at the end of the year. We have a question about type of volunteers. Volunteers can be episodic, which is one-time volunteers or less frequent volunteers, and volunteers can be ongoing. So that would be a volunteer that continues to serve with your organization throughout the year. Yes, you can include new and existing volunteers. I see just two quick questions. We'll end there for the time being. One of the questions is related to selecting one priority area. Yes, the organization will select one priority area, and those again would be education, disaster services, things like that. And it would be the area that most of your volunteers would be engaged in. It doesn't have to be inclusive of everything, but it would be the majority of how your volunteers are engaged. Okay, we'll move on. Thanks for your great questions, everyone.
Good morning, everyone. This is Debbie. Wanted to talk with you just a few minutes about budget. So as Audrey had mentioned, we're looking at about $13,000 per grant, and there are limited budget categories that you can use this money in. So the categories that you can use the $13,000 that you can allocate that to is personnel expenses, and that would include salaries and fringe benefits, transportation cost, and technology and equipment. Transportation can be related to travel between site locations or going to various places to recruit members or volunteers. Keeping in mind that Volunteer Florida does follow the state of Florida travel requirements. So for anything that you're going to invoice us for payment of, the mileage rate is currently at 44.5 cents per mile. So that cost for reimbursement cannot exceed that. Also keep in mind that this is cost reimbursement. So every month you're going to have to submit an invoice and supporting documentation for all expenses. The match requirement is dollar for dollar. So for the $13,000 for CNCS funds, you're going to have to show documentation of the $13,000 in match. So keep that in mind when you do your budget, is that you also have to provide documentation for your match. Technology and equipment, if you're needing to spend some dollars for equipment or software that are directly related to recruitment, support, management, or retention of your skill-based volunteers, and tracking volunteer demographics and activities, you could certainly use the funding for that. We would expect to see those expenses early on in the grant. We do not want to see these late in the year, because the purpose of buying this technology and equipment would be so that you could use it throughout the year to track that information. So just keep that in mind. The budget is broken down into those same categories. The CNCS share is where you're going to record what you're looking for in reimbursement. The grantee share is what you're going to be reporting in match. So again, on your budget, you'll break it down into personnel expenses, personnel fringe benefits, transportation and travel, and technology and equipment. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, let's take a look at the chat. I think I saw some questions come through. So the slides will be available within the webinar and after the webinar. Yes, that's correct. And then I see several match questions.
Yeah, so match can be a variety of things. It can be cash or it can be in kind. So that's really up to you. You do have to identify whether the match is going to be a cash donation or if it's going to be an in-kind donation. It is your responsibility to track all in-kind donations, and there are some guidelines that apply to in-kind donations and how as an agency you have to track those, but it can be a mixture of those.
I see a question related to the definitions of capacity building and skills-based volunteers. Our guidance is to follow those definitions that are articulated in the VGF application. That would be the best place to go to find those definitions. Any other questions in the chat? So a couple other questions related to funding and volunteers. So I'll answer a couple and then defer to you, Debbie. AmeriCorps Vista volunteers cannot be counted as volunteers for this grant. So there is language in our grant application that explains this further. Those do not count. Funding cannot be used for production of advertising. The funding allowability is in those three categories that Debbie mentioned: personnel, transportation, and technology and equipment only. I see a question related to priority area, and you would select a single priority area, but volunteers can volunteer and their hours can be counted in other areas. I see a question about reporting and deadlines for that. We will cover that in just a few minutes. Just as a quick reminder, no national service member, including AmeriCorps or AmeriCorps Vista, can be counted as a skills-based volunteers.
Okay, I see a question on transportation and fuel cards. If you're looking at purchasing fuel cards, you'll have to track how those cards are used. That could really get into a lot of tracking on your purposes. But yes, you could buy it. You cannot buy like Visa cards and use those because they can be used for other things. But if it is truly a fuel card only, then yes, you could. But again, you'll have to track how those cards are used and who they're assigned to.
And then one final question before we move on. There is a comment about a co-working space involving many organizations and if collaboration is possible. Certainly collaboration is always possible. You might want to give us a call offline to talk about that question because there does need to be a single lead for this application. One organization that would be the applicant and be responsible for the fiscal and programmatic reports. Oh, I see a couple more questions, and then we will move on to the actual application. There's a question about recruiting healthcare professionals, and that is a great idea. The funds cannot be used to do direct mailing. Costs for background checks are eligible for reimbursement. And now let's move on to the application. Great questions, everyone.
All right, in the RFP and right here is the anticipated timeline for the Volunteer Generation Fund. As you know, right now we are having our technical assistance call, and this will be posted along with the slides online on the Volunteer Florida page. After this call ends, Volunteer Florida applications or VGF applications are due August 22nd by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and those applications will be due online. We will not be accepting any paper copies. After that, we will go into an internal programmatic and budget review. Clarifications will be provided to applicants September 12th. Final applications and budgets, including the clarification changes, are due to Volunteer Florida by September 23rd, and then contracts will be provided to successful applicants October 3rd. Volunteer Florida will have a contract call with them, and then letters to applicants not receiving funding will be October 31st. And then for everyone who is selected as a VGF subgrantee, there is a required training which will be November 2016 in Central Florida. More information on that will be coming later.
Let's move to the next slide. All right, everyone. We are going to answer a few more questions, but if your questions have not been answered today, please, just as a reminder, this email is in the RFP. So you would email any questions to vgfapplication@volunteerflorida.org. So we're centralizing those questions. We'll take a few more in the webinar today, and then we will move you into the portal so you can see what the application looks like as you apply. A couple more questions. We see some questions related to background checks. I would encourage you to ask those via the email link because there are some specificities with that. The background checks have to be compliant with the CNCF National Service Criminal History Checks. So they are a 3-part background check. So I would go ahead and ask those detailed questions to the email address. Related to rules regarding who the volunteers can be, that would be your guidance, your policies at your organization. We do, however, intend the Volunteer Generation Fund to be targeting adults primarily. We have had some applicants in the past that were targeting youth and have funded some of those applicants. But just a reminder, we are looking for adult volunteers primarily. And so a question about background checks and volunteers, you would follow your own policies as an organization related to background checks of your volunteers. The National Service Criminal History Check is a requirement related to any staff positions on the federal or match side. So that background check, our requirement is related only to staff. The deadline to meet your performance targets is the end of the year. So the contracts will be for about a full year this year. So you will have until September of next year to meet those performance measures. Debbie, you want to, there's a couple of finance questions.
So I see the one about examples of reimbursable expenses for the grant. So for personnel, let's, for example, if you have a volunteer coordinator who is going to oversee this grant for you, that person's salary, whether they're 100% grant funded, is really going to be determined by your agency, but those expenses and the fringe benefits for that position would be an allowable expense. For transportation, If you are going to sites to do skill-based training or to recruit, travel would be reimbursable for those trips as long as it is directly related to recruiting or training your skill-based volunteers. Technology and equipment, if you need to buy software to track your volunteer hours or to have software for recruiting or to track your recruiting efforts, that would be an allowable expense. So there are some things that you know are common everyday things that you could include, but those are some very specific things that would definitely be an allowable expense.
Thank you, Debbie. What qualifies as an adult, 18 and over, is correct. Volunteer Florida is not supporting any pre-award cost for the grant. And what happens if you don't meet your performance measures is another question. Well, hopefully that will not happen. I don't think that's ever happened for our VGF grantees. However, there is a mid-year report on those targets, those number of volunteers and hours. If we saw you were low, we would work with you to help you meet that those performance measures at the end of the year.
Okay, there's a question about the limit on the amount that can be dedicated to salary and benefits. Again, your agency needs to determine how much time this individual would spend on the grant. And this is directly related to the grant. So that is something that your agency is going to have to determine. Keep in mind that we do require that timesheets be submitted that show the hours that are actually dedicated to this. If this position is split, meaning that they do other things within your organization, you have to account for all hours and what time is actually dedicated to this grant. So timesheets are a requirement if you put in personnel expenses. The benefits would be directly related to the amount of time that they spend on the grant. Okay, there's a question about the $13,000 as salary for a coordinator. Again, that's up to your agency as far as what you're going to pay an individual. We can't determine that for you. But if you decide to put the full $13,000 into salary and that person is, you know, their salary is determined to be at least that by your agency and they are 100% dedicated to this grant, you could certainly do that. Again, keep in mind, all hours for personnel must be tracked. Okay. There's a question about the average amount of personnel, of staff time that's been spent on the grants in the past. I really don't have a good answer for that because it is very specific to the agency and what they're doing. We have some agencies where they have someone that is totally dedicated to skill-based volunteering and recruiting. So they do 100% of that. Then we have other agencies that they have someone that just does 5%. So it really is based on the agency and what you're doing with skill-based volunteering. There's a question about federally funded and whether or not those funds can be used. You can use federal funds. However, you do have to have approval, and the other agency must acknowledge that they are aware that you are using those funds for match. You cannot use any CNCS funds for match. So keep that in mind.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Great questions, everyone. This funding source is really meant to support your capacity as an organization to improve your technology processes or improve your capacity relating to staffing so that you can engage more skills-based volunteers to meet critical needs. So thank you for these great questions. If you have any additional questions, please email them to the address.
Will we be answering?
So right now we are going to move on to the MicroEdge portal where you will be applying.
All right, everybody. So we do just want to highlight really quick in the RFP, pages 7 and 8. Those are the application scoring criteria. That is what the reviewers are going to score your application on, and the application on MicroEdge actually follows this exact outline. Just to note really quick, there is a new section for the past performance measures. If you have been a previous grantee in the last 3 years, there is a section for you to answer some additional questions. If you are a new application, please feel free to leave that blank. Okay, so just some user notes really quick. Please access the application in Internet Explorer or Mozilla Foxfire. This application is not Google friendly at the moment, and so what you will do is this link right here is on the Volunteer Florida webpage under available grants, and it is also hyperlinked in the RFP. So we're going to just go ahead. And so right here, it can be found right here. If you click that, it will open you up into our application portal. So I'm just going to walk through the basics on how to start an account and how to fill out an application. So if you are a current grantee or if you have used the Volunteer Florida MicroEdge portal before, you will have a username and password already. And so you can go ahead and type that in. If you are a new applicant, you'll just fill out new applicant, and you'll put in your email and your password. The password must contain at least 5 characters, both with letters and numbers. Okay, and then if for some reason you're a returner and you cannot remember your password, you can hit Forgot Password, enter the email address that was created for this, and then it will send you a temporary password, which then will prompt you to go in and make a new one. Okay, so once you have your password and your username, you can go ahead and log in if you remember your username and password correctly. Okay, the first thing it's going to ask you is to enter your tax ID number. So you'll want to make sure that you enter that and press OK. And then you're going to have to fill out this brief eligibility quiz. These are questions, again, it's in the RFP. It's going to ask, are you a Florida-based organization? Is your organization one of the following? And it lists multiple types of that, multiple types of organizations. And then do you use volunteers to meet the mission of your organization? Once you've selected your questions, you'll press submit. And it will open up the first cover sheet. Your tax ID will pre-populate your organization's name and tax ID, and then if you are a returning grantee, it will populate some information from last year or previous years. But at any time, you can definitely change anything that you need to. You'll select your organization type. You'll decide if you're a new or a previous applicant, and you'll choose your Florida region. Some of these have little help boxes that give you further instructions or help in case there's confusion. And then there are some hyperlinks, which if you open it, will then take you to the document that you'll need. So again, you'll fill out your address and the applicant information. In some scenarios, the CEO or the executive director is the one filling out the application, and if that is true, you will just press this box and then it will autofill this information here. If it's different, we would like the information of your CEO and ED and or ED, and then we would have you put down your application information down here. So here's the cover sheet, and then what you'll do is you'll simply hit next. And then you'll fill out the next part, right? You'll put in your project title. You'll fill out your city served, your county served. You'll hit one primary focus area. If, again, you're still having some issues with the definitions, you can find through this hyperlink the CNCS definitions of each of those. If you're a special consideration, please check one or both if applicable. And then you'll also opt into 3 out of the 8 volunteer management practices here. You can definitely select more than 3 if you would like, but you must select 3.
Muted. Unmuted.
Can you hear us now? Okay, great. And so then you'll just move through the application. There's a 500-word limit on all of the text boxes. A good user practice is to type it and save it in Word, and then you can copy and paste it in here. It will give you a word count, so it'll let you know if you're over, and then there is also spell check in each of the boxes. So you'll just go through and you'll fill all of this information out. Here you're going to opt into the performance measures by clicking this box, and then you're going to describe via the prompts the narrative on how you plan to meet those performance measures, and then there is a section for the budget narrative. So this year the budget will be uploaded via an Excel sheet. You won't have to type in any of the information like previous years. So in the narrative you'll follow the prompts in the scoring criteria, and then on the Excel sheet you'll fill out the numbers and upload that through this portal, and I'll show you in just a second. Okay, so this is the submission page, even though it's, you still have one more. It's a tricky little application. So you're going to check this box saying that you understand that you have to participate in a 3-part background check, and then you're going to check this box saying that everything in this application is true. And then you'll put in your electronic signature and your date, and you'll press next. And then this is where you're actually going to upload your final budget. So fill the budget out in the Excel sheet, save it to your own computer, and then what you'll do is you'll browse. And then you'll upload. And then you want to make sure to hit the upload button. Okay, and so here you can see that it has been uploaded. It shows you the file name that we are giving it at Volunteer Florida, and then it'll show the name of whatever you have named it on your side. The maximum update, the maximum attachment can be 25 megabytes. I am pretty sure no one is going to reach that, but if for some reason you do have a problem, please reach out to the email provided and we can work on that for you. So once that has been uploaded, you will hit review and submit. So as you can see, there are some parts of the application that are required. If you try to hit review and submit and you have not filled those out, you will get this lovely little red messaging telling you to please fill that out. So what you'll do is you'll just go back in the application and fill out the blanks that are missing. It will not let you submit unless all of the required fields are filled out. And so let's say we do all of that, and then you'll press update, and then there is a final submit button. If you log in and you are not ready to submit, you can hit save and finish later. It will tell you by this red message that your application has been saved, and then under the applications portal you can see actually the applications that you have. And so if you do, for future reference, when you do submit, you can hit the submitted applications, and then you can see all of your previously submitted applications. So, but you want to stay in progress. And at any time you can access that until the 22nd of August. And so you would just re-click it to open it. And the two things that I just want to briefly mention, either if you save and finish later, or if you submit for the final, you will get an email to your account. And so you'll get an email like this that will say your application has been saved. It offers you a tracking number, so at any time there are any issues, you can't find it, you can send over that tracking number to us and we can help locate that. It also gives you, again, the link for the grant for you to log back in. And if you submit it, you will get the same message, but it'll say thank you for your submission, and again, it will give you a tracking number. So at any time there's an issue on whether you have submitted or if it's saved, you can forward over that tracking number and then we can track that application for you. Are there any questions?
So just a quick reminder, if you do not get an email that says your application has been submitted, you did not submit your application. So you would look for that email that confirms your submission, and any pending submissions would be in progress within the system. So quick reminder, you will get the email, and that is how you will know you have submitted. Any questions related to the background check, I would encourage you to check out the link on page 5 in the VGF application. There's some details about the background check and a link to the CNCS National Service Criminal History Check. That would be the best place for you to go, where you can email us some specific questions. But at a high level, what this includes is a fingerprint-based FBI check, a state of residence check, and a national sex offender predator website check. Those were the 3 parts.
Yes, so in the RFP, you can see a sample of the budget, but on the Volunteer Florida webpage, there is the RFP and then there is a budget, and you can download that. Mm-hmm. So if you click here where it says download the Volunteer Generation Fund budget form, it will prompt you to save it as an Excel, and then it will open like this.
Great questions, everyone. Any additional questions related to the MicroEdge grant application portal? Okay. Well, we have so many participants here today. It looks like a few of you have some budget questions or background check questions. And yes, to clarify, the background checks are related to the staff that is being paid for out of these federal funds or match funds. Related to background checks for your volunteers, you would follow your own organization's policy related to that. So we're really excited that so many of you have joined us today. We look forward to answering your questions over the next couple weeks. We are really excited to expand the Volunteer Florida Volunteer Generation Fund to 22 organizations this year. Last year, we received about 54 applications for 20 slots, for 20 grantees. So I would encourage you to make your application as competitive as possible. Follow the prompts exactly and make sure you address all of the questions in the scoring criteria as thoroughly as possible. And please feel free to contact us with any questions as well. So thank you so much for your call today, and with this webinar will be recorded and posted on our website in the very near future. Thanks, everyone.